Joe, ready to call meeting to order?
Yeah, go ahead, Hunter.
Okay. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners Mule Deer Enhancement Oversight Committee, Mule Deer Enhancement Program Subcommittee, Esmeralda County Management Areas 16, 17, 21, and 25 on this Monday, April 26th, 2021 at 5:30 p.m.
All right, Hunter. Next, I'll just do a quick roll call. If you could please provide an introduction of yourself and who you're representing once I say your name and signify that you're in attendance. So we'll start with Chrissy Pope.
I'm one of the subcommittee members for Nye County.
Hey, Chrissy, don't go ahead and provide a little information, kind of who you're representing and kind of who you are.
Okay. I am the chairman for the Nye County CAB. I currently live in Tonopah. Hunt area 16, 17, 21, 25. So, yep, I'm here to help improve our mule deer in our area and stuff. And like I said, I am the current chairman for the Nye County CAB.
Thank you, Chrissy. And next we'll go to Kevin Strozzi.
I don't know if anyone can hear me, but you were cutting in and out there on my end. Who are you? Who's up next?
We'll go with you, Kevin. We can hear.
Okay. Okay. See if I can turn my video on. I'm having heck with my lighting, so I don't know if anyone can see me or not, which probably doesn't matter. But anyways, my name's Kevin Strozzi. I'm a Nye County resident, longtime Nye County resident. And I'm representing sportsmen and hunters of Nye County. I was a Nye County member of the Nye County CAB for about 15 years. I was the chairman for I think 12 years of that. And mule deer is my passion. That's what I love most. That's what me and my kids do most. I'm a deer hunter. I hunt everything I can get a tag for, but I'm a deer hunter at heart. So when the opportunity came up and I was asked to be part of this enhancement committee, I jumped at the chance. So that's me.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. And next we have Nick Perchetti. I noticed Ryan Perchetti's a attendee. So we just in case if he's sitting with his dad, we'll give you the opportunity. I don't know, Ryan, if you can speak up real quick.
Things, but I'm going to sit in if it's okay for everybody. I'm also part of the board here in Tonopah and been hunting Central Nevada for the last 35 years, I guess, since I was about 5. So I appreciate this meeting coming out and this trying to get everything straightened out here with the mule deer herd in Central Nevada. It's going to be quite interesting.
All right, thank you, Ryan. So next we'll go with the NDEP personnel on the subcommittee. We'll go with Hunter Burkett.
Hi, I'm Hunter Burkett. I'm the new Tonopah game biologist. I've been at the job for about 2 months now. But I started out working for the Nevada Department of Wildlife as a fisheries seasonal, then slowly graduated and moved up the ladder up to my last position, which was a 3/4 biologist in the Eastern region, primarily assisting with aerial surveys. But yeah, happy to be here in Central Nevada and look forward to the opportunities that this subcommittee will create.
Perfect. Thanks, Hunter. And next we'll go Tracy Kipke, if she is still on. And I know I'm not seeing her on. I know she's having some technical difficulties with her audio, but she's our Southern Region habitat biologist that will be a part of this subcommittee. So if she comes back, we'll give her the opportunity to address or introduce herself. And then I should have done this from the beginning, but my name's Joe Bennett. I'm the Southern Region Supervisory Game Biologist. I'll just be assisting with the facilitation of this meeting. So I believe that concludes our introduction. So Hunter, if you want to proceed with the next agenda item.
Sure, which is agenda item number 2, approval of agenda. For possible action, the subcommittee will review the agenda and may take action to approve the agenda. The subcommittee may remove items from the agenda, combine items for consideration, or take items out of order. Are there any questions in regards to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll take it out to public comment period, which will be 3 minutes. All public comment must be only accepted via email, and the email address is on the screen below, ndowgame@ndow.org.
All right, Hunter, that's been 3 minutes. I think we can reconvene. I'm not seeing any public comment regarding the agenda.
Okay, no public comment. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to approve the
Make a
agenda.
motion to approve the agenda.
Do I have a second?
Gotta love this Zoom. I think me and Chrissy both made a motion, so you can use Chrissy's and I'll second it.
Okay. Um, All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. So now we are going to move on to agenda item number 3, which is a report on the Mule Deer Enhancement Program informational. The subcommittee will review presentations on the status and history of mule deer in areas 16, 17, 21, and 25. The challenges facing those herds, the Mule Deer Enhancement Program limiting factor ranking and project identification process. Following the presentations, the subcommittee will discuss any comments and questions. Okay, for those unfamiliar with Zoom, you can move or minimize the screens of people's faces, the videos, so you can better see the presentation. Okay, herd history and overview of limiting factors. First, the concept of the MDEP. There's an oversight committee to provide input to the Wildlife Commission with mule deer habitat challenges. There will be a creation of teams that will be identifying limiting factors of specific mule deer herds. And then they will then create specific projects to address these limiting factors. And some of the sources of funding, the mule deer enhancement projects will rely on some of the following funding, the Heritage Fund, NGO partners, the Predator Fund, federal partners, federal grants, the Habitat Conservation Fee, and we'll also be able to derive funding from other sources as well. So mule deer biology and diet. Mule deer are primarily browsers, which means their diet mostly consists of shrubs. Mule deer require a varied diet of highly quality nutritious forage. They consume far less vegetative matter than other ruminants, even in comparison to relative body mass, but must consume more nutritious forage because they have a smaller stomach in comparison. So young and new growth offer the greatest nutrient value for mule deer. Forbs and grasses are also important for mule deer in the summer and spring, and forbs are just a non-woody, showy, flowery plant. Mule deer are shrub reliant, which means they require shrubs for year-round use, but it's most critical in the winter. Pinyon and Juniper patchy habitat is also fantastic cover for mule deer during the winter. Seasonal migrators, mule deer are seasonal migrators, and in Nye, Esmeralda counties, mule deer are primarily elevational migrators. So a short history of Nevada's mule deer. So as you can see here, early on in the early 1900s, late 1800s, mule deer were scarce and at incredibly low numbers prior to European settlement. And through habitat alterations, European Americans created an increased browse habitat. And some of those alterations were through mines and exploration, utilizing timber to create buildings and houses. So mule deer populations increased through the expansion of sagebrush and other shrub habitat, and also a lot of favorable climatic conditions in central Nevada. coupled with those favorable climatic conditions was extreme predator control. And as you can see here, we have a few big, large dips in the mule deer populations in Nevada. And especially here up here in the latest large drop, mostly can be attributed to a severe winter in 92 and 93, where it was then followed by a severe drought. So the Esmeralda subcommittee will really focus on these areas here, 16, 17, 21, and 25 here in Central Nevada. So the rest of the presentation will focus on these management areas and the limitations that these mule deer face. So area 16 here outlined in red. Let's start off with a summary of this herd, which consists of the Taquimas, the Monitors, Hot Creeks, and North Pancakes. So here is a graph of the area 16 population estimate through time. On the x-axis, we have our years through starting off at 1976. And on the y-axis, we have an estimate of number of deer. So as we can see through the favorable climatic conditions, this mule deer herd really took off. And we saw high fawn to doe ratios on our aerial surveys, which we derive our populations models off of. And then here, right at that peak in 1992, 93 winter, we saw a precipitous decline. And then drought conditions followed that, which just sent that population on a downward trend. And in this graph here is the area 16 mule deer herd trend, along with our fall sample survey size and our spring sample survey size. Once again, the x-axis is year and the y-axis is number of deer. So there are some gaps, as you can see in the line graph of fall sample survey size and spring sample survey size, and that's mostly attributed to an inability to survey that year, poor weather conditions or scheduling conflicts. So fall surveys are conducted post-hunt. So a post-hunt survey is conducted right around the rut in order to better accurately observe bucks and model a more accurate buck to doe ratio. And a spring survey will tell us kind of who made it through the winter to see what fawns will be recruited in the population. So these, our aerial surveys are conducted via helicopter. We're utilizing the terrain to guide us in a search pattern, and then we'll veer from a terrain, or veer from our search pattern when we observe a group, classify that group, and then come back to our search pattern and continue survey. It's also important to note that NDOW is currently conducting 2 approaches towards aerial surveys, one of which is a stratified watershed survey approach, which surveys portions of the entire unit, achieves a smaller sample survey size, but generates more statistically accurate and defensible data. And that's why you might see some smaller sample sizes here in this graph in the orange line and green dotted line. So, and the other approach, which we've typically taken in the past, is a directed effort, which we have done historically, which we approach deer, fly directly towards where mule deer have been observed in the past, and typically have congregated in the past, and achieves a higher sample survey size. And what's important also to note here is survey or sample size does not directly correlate to population size. So weather, flight timing, detection, probability are some of the few factors that can influence sample survey sizes. So here's that trend, that estimate over the years, overlaid with a precip monitor here in central Nevada. And we're able to kind of observe how this population grows or contracts based off of drought or increased precipitation over time periods. So kind of here at the center of the graph, we can see several years of higher precip, and then in turn, a bump in the population. And then we can see back here, right after that severe winter in 92, 93, we see several years of drought where this population just continues on downward trend. So here is the Area 16 mule deer harvest over the years since 1996. Once again, x-axis is our years, and our y-axis is the total number of mule deer harvested. And as you can see, in the late 80s, early 90s, we had higher doe harvest. And then once that population came down, we backed off of those quota recommendations and then have had low conservative harvest ever since. So here is on the x-axis year and y-axis number of mule deer. We can look at our mule deer harvest in Area 16 while looking at the mule deer estimated population. And you can really tell how conservative we are in our quota recommendations when putting it on a map and in comparison to the mule deer population estimates in Area 16. And so here's all of those metrics we've been looking at combined into one graph. And you can see here in the orange line, the fall sample survey size, and the green dashed line are spring sample survey size. So here is Area 16's percent 4 point or greater, and here's our average here, right at 38. And as you can tell, year to year, we jump up and down and kind of encircling that line, the average line of 38%. And here's our Area 16 modeled buck to doe ratio. So the NDOW post-hunt buck ratio objective of 30 is well in line here with our average at 36 bucks per 100 does. And this Area 16 is a standard unit. And here we're looking at Area 16 fall and spring ratios, fawn to adult and fawn to doe. So here in the green, we have our modeled fall fawn to doe ratios. And as you can tell, in comparing these two, we have overwinter loss every single year. And while looking at the modeled spring fawn to adult ratio, that is due to bucks typically lose their antlers before we conduct our surveys. And so that is skewed a little bit lower due to that higher ratio of bucks, because they're all being classified as adults. Now we'll move on to the Area 17 mule deer herd and their historic trends. And the Area 17 herd consists of the mountain ranges, the Toyabe, Shoshones, and the Paradise Range. So here we have the Area 17 population estimate. It mirrors the Area 17 population estimate and how the population is having favorable climatic conditions, and we're seeing high fawn to doe ratios on aerial surveys. Then once again, we have that peak and then that harsh winter of 92, 93, where the population takes a precipitous decline, and it's followed by consistent drought conditions, and then the population kind of stables out here. So here is that Area 17 mule deer herd trend with the fall sample survey size and spring sample survey size. And that fall sample survey size is in orange, and the spring sample survey size is there in that dashed gray. So we do have that. So we have the y-axis being the number of deer, and the x-axis being the particular year that this population is estimated at. So once again, we do have those gaps in the data due to inability to aerial survey that year. And some of those lower sample survey sizes could be due to a stratified versus a directed survey approach that I alluded to earlier. And here is the Area 17 precipitation and mule deer herd trend overlaid with that precipitation gauge that I talked about earlier in the Area 17 portion of the presentation. So we can once again see several years of drought after that severe 1992-93 winter, and then several years of higher amounts of precipitation, which popped that population up just quite a bit, but then has remained stable ever since. So here is the Area 17 mule deer harvest. So we can see again that during those high years of the population estimates, we had a bit higher quotas for does, but then after that large decline, we kind of stabled out and have had low doe and buck harvest ever since. So here is the population estimate. So the x-axis is the particular year, and y is the number of mule deer estimated, or just number of deer. And you can really see how conservative we are in our quotas in comparison to the population estimate. Now looking at all four of those metrics combined into one graph, we can see here the fall sample survey size here in orange, carrying through the years, and then the spring sample survey size in that dashed gray line, along with our harvest in the yellow at the bottom, and then that blue line is tracking the Area 17 population estimate. And so here's the Area 17% 4-point or greater with an average of 40 here. And so this drop of 4-point or greater can be attributed to difficult access in the Arc Dome wilderness. So the buck to doe ratio has remained stable over the years, and increased observations of bucks within the wilderness boundary of Arc Dome has occurred. So our harvest metrics, our harvest objectives and quality metrics, we're still well within these boundaries. And this year, we're actually entering into a 3-tiered season structure to allow for greater success and hopefully less congestion. So here's that Area 17 modeled buck to doe ratio. With our average here at 34%, and then on the x-axis, we have our particular year and the number of bucks per 100 does on our y-axis. NDOW, once again, is managing for this standard unit a post-hunt buck ratio objective of 30. And as you can see, we're well above that. So here we have our Area 17 fall and spring fawn to doe ratios. On the x-axis, we have our particular year, and on the y, number of fawns per 100 does or adults. So in the blue, we have our modeled fawn to doe ratio, and that dashed line is just showing that average of 57 there. And in our gray line, we have the modeled spring fawn to adult ratio, and then the dashed line right there is our average over the years. So there is missing data in here, and that's just once again because of an inability to aerial survey during that time. So now we will be moving on to the Area 21 mule deer. And this herd resides in the Silver Peaks, Palmetto Mountains, Weepaw Hills, and Monte Cristos. And most of the mule deer reside in hunt units 212 and 211. So this population, we do not aerial survey due to low population numbers and just inconsistent surveys that won't help us derive a population model. So here's our harvest over time here, and on that x-axis is the particular year, and y being the number of deer harvested. And it kind of fluctuates through time. So here is the Area 21 mule deer harvest coupled with the precipitation from a gauge here in central Nevada. And we can kind of see through time it fluctuates up and down and pretty inconsistent. And then we'll see favorable precip patterns like over here. And then we'll see favorable harvest along with those favorable patterns of precip. And here is the Area 21 any legal weapon success over the years, where 37 is our averaged any legal weapon percent success. And NDOW has a hunter any legal weapon success objective at 35 to 45%. And so here is the Area 21% 4-pointer greater, with the x-axis being particular year and y being the percent 4-pointer greater. So that dashed line right there is our average, which is at 38%. And it's very volatile due to low quotas. And we also saw that in the success graph. And so you kind of have a lot of fluctuation over time, and it's a bit less stable. Now we'll be moving on to a history of the trends of Area 25 mule deer herd, the majority of which reside in the Kawich Range in 251 here in red. And there is a small population that resides on Stonewall down there in 252. And so here's our Area 25 mule deer harvest And once you can see kind of varies through the years. And then also this Area 25 mule deer herd is also not aerial surveyed. And we do not recommend quotas based off of a population model, but rather off of harvest metrics, similar to Area 21. So here we can see once again favorable precip, which creates better habitat, more deer on the landscape, and then we see a greater harvest a handful of years later. Area 25 any illegal weapon percent success. We see here the average is 30% over the years. And so this is volatile again due to the low quota prescribed in these units. And so we are recommending another reduction in tags kind of due to this lower success in this unit. And it is difficult for hunters to hunt this unit. We also, so NDOW does have a hunter success harvest objective of 35 to 45%. Area 25% 4-point or greater. Here we have on the x-axis the particular year, and then y percent 4-point or greater. So here at that dashed line, we're at 51%. And once again, it's very volatile. It's bouncing up and down kind of throughout the years due to that lower quotas and kind of just, throughout the years. Now we'll be moving on to discuss some more of the limiting factors in these mule deer management areas, 16, 17, 21, and 25. Those are as follow: drought, water, horses, fires or lack thereof, agriculture, human impacts, pinyon and juniper, and predators. So Nevada drought. So this map here of Nevada, let's see, we can see that Nye County and Esmeralda County are in at least an extreme drought, but also an exceptional drought. And this has been a sustained drought that has plagued central Nevada for many years. So this affects forage components. This affects adult fitness and overwinter fawn loss as adults and fawns go into winter in poor shape. And so in our next slide, we'll see a monitor of drought here on the x-axis going back to 2000 and all the way to 2022. And then on the y, we see the percent of Nevada that is in drought. And as you can see, there has been extended drought in Nevada with very few years of reprieve. And the years that we are in drought have been becoming increasingly more droughty and less precipitation. And it's a drought cycle it's a drought cycle after a drought cycle after a drought cycle. And it seems as if we're entering into yet another drought cycle. So water developments. Most water developments in central Nevada were actually created for bighorn and pronghorn use. They can provide much needed water during drought years, but they cannot replace the vegetative component that's reduced in drought. It's important to note we are working on a large-scale EHA that will enhance some mule deer populations, and we're working with federal partners. And water in 16 and 17 isn't typically a limiting factor, at least freestanding water, that is. Horses in Nevada. Horse populations have been increasing dramatically in recent years. Horses compete around riparian areas with native wildlife. Horses have upper incisors that rip the grasses from the soil, killing the plant, unlike native wildlife. But roundups can be extremely expensive and unpopular, unfortunately. Horses are also aggressive in nature and end up pushing animals off of water and trample mesic sites. So here's a table of some of the herd management areas in central Nevada, looking at that high-end HML, and then the estimated population that the BLM gave us here in red. In red, it indicates that population is above HML. And then on one column over to the right, we can see the percent of HML, and some of those percents are incredibly high, and sometimes that's just because that population is that HML is not supposed to hold any horses at all, but also it can be due to just that the population is well over the high end. So fires, or the lack thereof. Fires can serve mule deer some benefit, actually, if burned in the right way and in the right area. Plant senescence is rampant in these units. And plant senescence just means when a plant matures, its forage quality for mule deer or other wildlife declines. So we can see here in the map just a handful of fires that have occurred in central Nevada, up in Stone Cabin Basin, and some fires in the Paradise Range, but largely untouched, which is very unique to Nevada. Unfortunately, many parts of Nevada have been ravaged by fire, but central Nevada has been left untouched. So older plants are quite less palatable and provide less nutrition as well because of a lack of fire and a lack of disturbance. And unfortunately, in regards to succession, with a lack of fire leads to the inevitable PJ encroachment, reducing available wildlife habitat. So yeah, to reiterate, central Nevada has a very unique fire regime compared to the rest of the state. So now moving on to agriculture in central Nevada. So this map is depicting all agriculture in central Nevada. Agriculture can actually give mule deer some reprieve with droughty conditions, and central Nevada does not have this resource to fall back on, as opposed to other areas in the state of Nevada. And mule deer do not typically use agriculture in central Nevada. More on human impacts. Domestic livestock grazing regimes can also alter habitat availability and mule deer distribution, but that's just occurs with overgrazing. And then agriculture, roadways and fences can hinder deer movement and cause mortality. When a mule deer is traveling down to its winter range and it has to hop over 20 fences, it can greatly reduce the fitness and the ability of that mule deer to survive through the winter. In agricultural land can change seasonal use for mule deer, distribution patterns, and lead to landowner conflict. Luckily, we don't have those issues here in central Nevada as much. Juniper encroachment. So this map is depicting an example of some of the PJ expansion in central Nevada. Now, it's not the greatest, it's not the greatest depiction, but it's at least an example, because as we all know, in Area 16, there are far more PJ forests than being depicted here in this map. Let's see, Pinyon and Juniper does reduce the available forage for mule deer and other wildlife as it encroaches into the sagebrush steppe ecosystem. So here's a great map depicting the habitat degradation through Pinyon and Juniper encroachment. We'll start off with an altered fire frequency and drought, which then leads to the expansion of Pinyon and Juniper stands. So then that, due to those expansions, there's reduced shrub, forb, and grass cover on the landscape, which, as we all know, mule deer so readily rely on. And then by reducing those forbs, shrubs, and grass covers, there's an increased soil erosion. You will see rilling and many other indicators of poor soil health. PJ also consumes many gallons of water each day, which can be harmful to an ecosystem so heavily reliant on limited water sources. And in certain cases, it has allowed springs to recharge. It really devastates quality mule deer habitat when it ends up encroaching into it. Now we'll move on to some completed habitat projects in regards to Pinyon and Juniper. So here is our Clear Creek in Danville. And this is located in Little Fish Lake Valley here, just east of Table Mountain in Hunt Units 162 and 163. In 2017, about 700 acres of Pinyon and Juniper were removed near Clear Creek. In 2018, 500 acres. And Clear Creek here is that upper polygon we're seeing here. And in 2018, 500 acres of Pinyon and Juniper removed were removed near down here in Danville. And the removal of these trees will allow the herbaceous understory to regenerate, providing good forage and habitat for mule deer at certain times of the year. Now, here in Pasco Canyon, here's another PJ removal project. Another 217 acres of Pinyon and Juniper were removed near Pasco Canyon. And this it was conducted in Hunt Unit 161, just northeast of Table Mountain. So this was conducted with the help of local resource conservation programs. Horse Canyon and had approximately 2,000 acres of Pinyon and Juniper removed here in Hunt Unit 162 in Little Fish Lake Valley. Carver's Bench. So here on Carver's Bench, Toyabe Bench, just east of the Toyabe Range, west of Carver's, 2,600 acres of Pinyon and Juniper were treated on the bench, and this is crucial mule deer winter habitat. And there's been different treatments in this habitat. So current research that's being conducted based off of that Carver's Bench PJ removal project So it's a collaring project and a body condition project. In 2018, radio collaring and habitat enhancement project, which was the pinyon and juniper removal, was implemented here on Carver's Bench, which is on the east side of the Toyabis in Hunt Unit 173. So once again, I'll reiterate, 2,600 acres of pinyon and juniper were treated on this bench, and 30 adult female mule deer were collared to study the response to this removal. This collaring effort occurred over 2 years with 20 mule deer being collared in April 2018 and 15 mule deer being collared in March 2019. So this data will help the Nevada Department of Wildlife better understand the movements of these mule deer and the distribution and critical use areas that are more refined at a more refined scale in Hunt Unit 173. And this habitat component of this project will enhance winter forage conditions for many years. So presently, the collaring data has validated expected seasonal habitat use and movements. One interesting aspect is that the collaring data has depicted that this population only moves on an elevational gradient based off of seasonality, which means movement from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain is based off of seasons, and there's no large scale migrations along this mountain range. So here's a better picture of some of those movements. Each dot represents a point in which that collar, in which a certain deer's collar had taken a point. And so you can see even over here in the Shoshones, mule deer migrated over from the Shoshones and went over the Toyabis and spent their winter here on the Toyabe bench. But as you can tell, a lot of these seasonal movements here, the mule deer spend their time up here in the alpine habitat, utilizing those resources. And then at some point, they jump down to the Toyabe bench and spend the winter and early spring there. And this is just a subset of 6 individuals. So it's not depicting all 30 collared does. And here are some great photos that were taken by a colleague of ours of these mule deer utilizing Carver's Bench pinyon and juniper treatment project. Now on to predation. Predation does occur in areas 16, 17, 21, 25. Predators are also only one factor regulating mule deer in central Nevada. So predation is a very visible source, a tangible source of mortality that can be easy to fall back on when adult fitness and senescent plants, among other less visible limitations to a population. Predator removal projects are most effective when done dealing with a population well below the vegetative carrying capacity, the vegetation component of the habitat in which mule deer can reside on. And removals must be conducted in a very small window during the fawning period and in specific areas to see measurable effects. Predator or increased mule deer fitness can also reduce predation impacts on a herd. Now we'll move on to questions. Does anyone have any questions?
All right, if none of the subcommittee members have any questions, Hunter, we'll move on to the limiting factors sheet and the needs assessment form.
Okay.
You want to go to your next slide? So here we'll kind of go into the next steps. So here in the next couple months, we'll have a follow-up meeting or sometime probably early summer. And we'll be providing you guys with the limiting factor ranking sheet and the needs assessment form. So the factor ranking sheet is where you provide the your ranking 0 to 5, each one of these. So you're essentially assessing, is wildfire an issue in these areas? Is it improper grazing or shrub senescence or pinyon juniper encroachment? And then so you're ranking all those 0 to 5, and then so everyone's scores will be averaged. It's important to note that the Mule Deer Enhancement Oversight Committee, the main overarching committee, will have a meeting on, I believe it's this Wednesday, where they'll be discussing these forms. So these might be subject to change slightly once they finally approve them. But then once of all the subcommittee members, once we average everything out, then it could be, if you want to go to the next sheet, Hunter, say you choose pinyon, juniper, or conifer encroachment or invasion as one of your main limiting factors. Then you address the needs assessment form, and I apologize for this one being Lincoln County. It'll be the same for each of these units in Central Nevada. But then you decide, okay, what's a project to achieve the targeted area where you're trying to perform that task, or how do you want to perform that task? Now, keep in mind, a lot of these projects will occur on federal land management agencies, so they may need NEPA clearance and different things like that. And it's important to note when you're filling out these forms, when we provide them to you, we don't want anyone to operate in a vacuum. Don't be afraid to, if you're members of the public, to communicate with the subcommittee. Don't be afraid to talk to one another. We want this to be a highly collaborative effort. It is important to note that once we average everything out and say the subcommittee decides their 3 top limiting factors, and then they want to try to address projects that'll be sent to the oversight committee, it might be important to note that when the oversight committee is ranking them, since they're ranking 17 different counties, or a couple might be connected at the hip, but it's such as 9 Esmeralda. But it will be important to note that some of the projects that might have NEPA clearance or might have other funding sources in place might take a little higher priority. It's not to say that new projects won't go through. It just might take a little bit to get them off the ground, to go through the federal land management agency process, or whatever, for lack of a pun, but the limiting factors are there. It's also important to note that we plan on this being a multi-year project. This isn't going to be a one and done project. So Hunter, if you go to the next slides, we'll kind of discuss what the next steps are. So as I mentioned before, our next meeting will be where we discuss the limiting factors. Once the oversight committee approves a final version, we should be able to provide that to the subcommittee members. And then we'll have that filled out before the next one. Hopefully once COVID restrictions start to wane, we'll have the opportunity to do some field trips, to come look at some of these projects that have already been completed, look at some of the winter range, different habitats where these mule deer reside in Central Nevada. And then after that, we're hoping maybe by early fall, it might be realistic to submit some proposed projects to the oversight committee, where it might be where, like I said before, you get your top 3 projects or 5 at most and submit that to the oversight committee and then see where it goes from there. But like I said before, we expect this project to be highly collaborative. We expect it to be multiple years, and if you guys have any questions, don't be bashful. And then Hunter, that kind of concludes what I would like to mention there. Does anybody have any questions about the forms or needs assessments or moving forward here?
Hey, this is Kevin. Hey, can you hear me, Joe?
Yeah, we got you loud and clear, Kevin.
Hey, is there any way before we start filling out those assessment forms and stuff, can we get a history on the antlerless harvest on the junior hunt since the inception of the junior hunts and whenever that was, 98, 99, whenever it was, to now, like an annual, is there a way to get those numbers?
Yeah, and Hunter had it depicted in his presentation. It was, it was with the buck harvest coupled with the antlerless harvest.
I was looking at them. I was just wondering if there's a specific, if I could get the specific numbers by the unit. And
That'll be simple enough.
I had one question on some of those slides. Do you guys know, I'm assuming those horse numbers in those units were provided by the BLM. And I'm wondering how current, do you know how current those numbers?
That was 2020 estimates. there,
Those were their
Kevin.
2020 estimates? Okay.
Sorry, I should have alluded to that.
No, that's okay. I didn't know if it might have been on the slide and I missed it. So, okay. That's all the questions I had. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? All right, with no further business on the agenda, I'll adjourn this meeting on Monday, April 20th.
One second, Hunter. So
Okay.
first, we gotta take it out to an overall public comment period for
Oh,
3 minutes before we
okay.
get to that point. So if you want to discuss that number 4 agenda item, Hunter, like you did the previous agenda items.
Sure. So persons wanting to submit public comment will only be accepted via email. So please send your public comments down to endowgame@endow.org. They're on that main screen at the bottom.
All right, Hunter. That concludes our end of public comment. We only have one public comment. It's from Ryan Perchetti, and I'll read it into the record. It's may I get the presentation sent to my email address so I can get it to my dad, Nick Perchetti, to review. I guess quickly to answer that question, we will make sure that a version of the presentation will be provided to the subcommittee members. And it will also be posted, I think, once the minutes are posted. So you should have access to that presentation.
So Joe, we don't have to go ahead. We don't have to take action on this, correct?
No, it's not for possible action, so you can adjourn the meeting now.
Okay. So with no further business on the agenda, I'll adjourn the meeting on Monday, April 26th, 2020 at 6:37 p.m. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks, Hunter.
Thank you.